And we're live. Good evening, everyone, or morning, depending on where you are in the or in the world. I see we have Nerdy Rodent in the chat and Critical Cripple.
Hey guys.
And Mom and Amanda, aka Mama Atheist, was here as well. I don't know if she's still here or not.
But she said she was going to be here.
Yeah. Anyways, welcome to this special episode of Media Musings. Today we're talking about basically World War II's impact on Eastern and Western media. And today I have a very special co-host, Vagrant Sam.
Hey, how's it going?
And you can go ahead and shill yourself if you'd like.
Sure, why not? So I'm Vagrant Sam. I run the channel Vagrant Sam, funnily enough. I do YouTube videos on... It's probably getting harder to say atheism at the moment because it's not directly atheism. It's kind of the things that come from that. You know, the whole atheism is not a worldview, but, you know, there's certain worldviews that atheists are more likely to hold. But I did a ripoff of Rings Media Musings where I did a episode about BoJack Horseman recently. Well, not recently, 3 weeks ago now. And I'm trying to do some other videos about, you know, world religions and rituals and festivals and stuff like that. As well as some good old response videos. Yeah. That's probably all I've got to shill for the moment, at least.
Yeah. And the Media Musings is, you know, more of a usually more of a like a panel show where we just kind of discuss themes in certain pieces of media. And it largely came from my approach to my channel is discussing how evangelical Christians approach the wider culture at large. Because you don't really have to do much research when you're talking about a completely subjective topic.
Well, they're fun topics, so
yeah, and yeah, there is that. And hello, Mountain Man, 1987. Yeah. Anyways, the topic today, Eastern and Western media post World War II. Do you want to go ahead and start, or?
Yep, sure. So the framing for this thought that's originally came up for, like, I read an article, this was a couple of years ago now, which it stuck out to me because obviously I've remembered it and I sort of often think about it and consider it when I'm watching anime. So I probably should have introduced myself as I am the anime fan. You got One Piece and stuff, a bunch of figures all along here. But there was an article that I read where it talked about the way that sort of media responded to World War II and contrasted the idea of, you know, America being, you know, one of the winning nations and Japan being one of the losing nations. And it looked at what resulted in popular culture following that. So in America, what they sort of lifted up as an example of, you know, media that was post-war was Superman. And Superman was very clearly good. He was justice, you know, the American way. He was, you know, very clearly, like, you know, if you to go to D&D terms, he was lawful good. Like, he was absolutely, he was a paragon of justice, a symbol of hope, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Conversely, you look at Japan, and the article that I read, which I should find a link to it to drop it in the chat or on the description, but they looked at it and said, hey, here's Astro Boy. He is the result of a post-war Japan, and it was a post-war Japan that looked at technology in a very not critical way, but you know, a big theme in particularly the 1980s Astro Boy. Now, I won't refer to the 1960s version just because like I only saw a couple of those episodes when I was very, very young, and I
Yeah.
say that as someone that was born in the '80s and it was reruns. I wasn't watching it in the '60s.
Yeah.
But in the '80s, it was very clearly like there was sort of I don't know if you call it racism, but humans and robots. There was a lot of fighting between the two classes of people's not the right word, but like
Beings.
humans were bigoted
Or
towards
persons.
robots. Yeah. And like the idea in Astro Boy is that Astro Boy as a robot has kokoro, which is heart, and he has his, he can make his own decisions, and for all intents and purposes, he is, as living a thing as a human is, but humans don't accept the technology. They're afraid of it. They're scared of it because Astro Boy's got like, I forget what it was, like, how it's like the strength of 20 men or something. And Astro Boy, it was like horsepower, and he had laser fingers, and he had a machine gun that came out of his butt for some reason.
Yeah.
Fly, and so it was sort of, it was optimistic. So Astro Boy was optimistic, but it wasn't necessarily optimistic about the way humans and technology interacted. Astro Boy really strongly tried to Astro Boy the character as opposed to the TV series. He really strongly tried to bridge that gap between humans and technology and stuff. So looking at that as a framework to start the discussion. Obviously, there's lots of other theories that dive into this, but that's
and touching on Superman, actually. So while Superman was, created before World War II in 1932, if I remember correctly, Superman and the wider superhero comics genre at large was very much shaped by World War II because they were very much used as propaganda to keep up the morale of the troops.
Yeah.
And this discussion had me thinking about one of my favorite, just because of how bonkers it is, one of my favorite issues of Superman from the not quite the Silver Age, but the late Golden Age. Pretty much immediately after World War II, it was first published in 1950. But here we go. We have Black Superman number 62, known at also titled Black Magic on Mars. It's Superman and Orson Welles fighting off an invasion of Martian Nazis.
That Martian Nazis.
Yes. Yes.
I haven't heard of that episode. I haven't heard of that issue.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason I even stumbled across it is because my high school library had like Superman Volume 1.
Yeah.
Like one of those omnibus reprint books. And so basically the story of this issue is the Martians picked up transmissions of Hitler's speeches and figured, oh, this guy's got a good, this guy's got a great.
That's good.
Yeah, this guy has some good points. So they become the Sol Nazis or the Solar Nazis.
Man,
under their leader Martler.
Not enough that they were aliens; they had to be Nazis as well. Jeez.
Yeah, and it actually ends with like Orson Welles buying time by scaring them with sleight of hand magic tricks, while Superman wrecks their launch pad to redirect their fleet into the sun. So it ends with Superman committing genocide, essentially.
They're right to kill if they're not human, as long as they're Nazis.
Yeah. But yeah, so in, very much post World War II, at least in the West, it's rather than, trying, it's we were the good guys. We came in and saved everyone, and the Nazis were obviously evil. Every bad guy is a Nazi. Heck, even as late as Star Wars, all the Empire is very, very Nazi coded.
I never really considered that. Like, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, so it's
Well, I'm talking the original trilogy.
Yeah.
You could
The only
pull up.
trilogy I've seen.
All the Imperial uniforms are
Oh, of
are
course.
patterned after Nazi uniforms.
Yeah.
And not only that, but the grunts are called stormtroopers.
Hang on, sorry, I lost the tab. But yeah, so you look at Superman and like so he's got enemies that are Nazis and aliens and stuff. The golden, so that was Golden Age, was it?
That was at the very end of the Golden
Sort
Age.
Of the cusp.
Yeah, saw the Nazi symbolism big time in Star Wars. But so a lot of comic historians are, the consensus is the Silver Age starts with the first appearances of Barry Allen as the Flash.
Ah, yes, of course.
I put it. I actually kind of mark it with the publishing of Seduction of the Innocent, because that's what that's the domino that set off the Comics Code Authority, which is basically the self-censoring of the comic book industry, and why we pretty much only have superhero comics nowadays.
All those Pulp Fiction, awesome
horror
comics and stuff.
Horror comics were actually strictly banned.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So to contrast that, the biggest villain I remember in Astro Boy. Now I'm not a lore expert in Astro Boy, but the biggest villain in Astro Boy, I'll share this screen.
Yeah.
So the most iconic villain probably. So that's sharing down. Yeah. So this is Atlas. Now he's not a Lex Luthor. Would you consider him to be Superman's biggest villain in like the Golden Age, or I don't want to make assumptions, but
he's now it depends on what you mean by biggest villain. He is definitely Superman's foil.
Or like the most iconic villain in terms
of most iconic. I'd say he's the most iconic of all time.
And
he's been with Superman since practically the beginning.
Yeah. And was he evil in the Golden Age?
Actually, even he wasn't really objectively evil. Like, he was, a criminal. Yep. He was a mad scientist. So there is actually in the Silver Age a story where he challenges Superman to a fist fight on a planet with a red sun, so that they'd be on equal footing, physically speaking.
Yep.
And basically, he ends up becoming the hero of this planet because it had fallen into disrepair, and he figured out how to get their water infrastructure working again. Because he's a genius.
Yeah.
And get all their old technology up and running again. But in the end, Superman still wins, and Lex Luthor goes back to jail because during the Comics Code, the villain always had to go back to jail.
Yep.
And the villain always had to go to jail, and but he sometimes he looks up at the stars and thinks about the planet and thinks about how good it felt to be a hero.
Oh, that's interesting. I know that there was at some point they developed the character into, him feeling like Superman wasn't wasn't worthy to be the protector of mankind, and it should be a human. Why they should trust an alien and stuff. I think that's when they started to give him a bit more depth as a character, rather than just being.
I think that's a more Bronze or a modern age interpretation, because the original origin of Lex Luthor, like in the Golden Age, is he's a mad criminal genius.
Yep.
Then as you kind of get into the Silver Age, he's a mad scientist who's miffed because Superman made him bald.
That came out of Smallville, didn't it?
Well,
one of the TV shows.
If it was on Smallville, it was an homage to an actual issue, because of Superboy comics, where Superman where Lex Luthor made this serum that would make him immune to kryptonite, and then he's working on something else in his lab, and it starts this fire. Well, Superboy comes and puts out the fire with his super breath, and spills a bunch of chemicals on Lex, and which causes him to go bald. So he blames Superboy, and that's why he hates Superman.
Anyway, sorry. I'll finish this Atlas thing. So Atlas is kind of, he's like the opposite of Astro Boy. So where Astro Boy was trying to protect the relationship between humans and robots, Atlas responded to the division between robots and humans, and decided because humans were so cruel to robots that they all deserve to die. And so that's a big one of the big story arcs in the series from my memory. And Astro Boy and Atlas are considered brothers because they're built from the same blueprint, which is why they look basically identical except for the color and the hair. And this is where it's interesting with like a lot of Eastern media, in my experience, is that the villains, while they do abhorrent things, I don't believe Atlas ever actually successfully kills anyone. It's just his goal. But like him and Astro Boy clash a few times, and Astro Boy obviously wins. Now let's see if this works. After they clash, Atlas does rebuild himself, and he evolves and he grows and theoretically becomes stronger and stronger. But once Atlas has reached this form here, in the final confrontation with Astro Boy is actually challenging him ideologically while they fight as well. And it comes to the point where he changes Atlas's mind, and I think Atlas I forget the exact details of the plan, but he was doing something that was going to kill everyone, and in the end he Atlas sacrifices himself to save the planet instead, and that's sort of the end of his character arc. And so the idea that there's always redemption for a lot of these characters in Eastern media, it really sort of it's, to me anyway, it makes it sort of feel like, here's a country that's struggling with the idea of right and wrong, and I think that they thought that what they were doing was right, and then when they lose the war and they come to their popular culture, where they explore the cultural zeitgeist that's surrounding a nation that just lost a world war, that they need to sort of think, oh well, yes, there has to be redemption, there has to be a way to move past this. And that's where you see this difference between the Superman and say someone like Astro Boy and stuff, and where a lot of the villains, not all the villains, but a lot of the villains are more compassionate, or you can be more empathetic with them anyway. And you see that in a lot of modern ones too.
And we don't really see that kind of dynamic until the late 60s. At least talking comic books. With Charles Xavier and Magneto with the XMen. And I'd say that actually supports the point that it's about trying to a nation trying to figure out what it's going to be. And because the X-Men in particular are very much a civil rights allegory.
Yeah.
And so you have Magneto, who is, you know, an Auschwitz survivor. So once again, going back to the Nazis, and, you know, who believes that human beings will inherently try to destroy anyone they think is different. So, you know, we are the mutants. We are stronger than them.
Yep.
We need to take that first strike to make sure they don't kill us first, because they hate and fear us. And
Yeah.
you know, you have Professor Xavier and the X-Men like, no, there's a peaceful way. Though arguably, Magneto, at least in the earlier comics, is more technically right, behaviorally speaking, than Charles Xavier, because Magneto's first target wasn't any kind of civilian target. It was a military base. His first act in X-Men issue 1 was to take over, I think it was Cape Canaveral, military base, you know, with his magnetic powers.
Yep.
And of course, Professor X responds by sending his, you know, his Black Ops team, essentially, of child soldiers to, you know, and that's
It's
not
about
even
framing. It's about PR.
Yeah.
It's a school, not a private army.
Yeah. And that's not even touching on the fact that having Aurora Monroe or Storm fighting on the team technically breaks the Geneva Conventions. Because there is something in the Geneva Conventions that says you're not allowed to weaponize the weather. And Storm's power is she controls the weather. So yeah.
That's the thing with X-Men though as well, is like I almost consider Magneto to be a anti-hero. Like he the true villains in X-Men are like Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse. Like those sort of overarching nemesis characters that are like they kind of really embody that, you know, there is evil that exists in people, and there are evil people and there are good people. And that's something that I find to be rarer in Eastern media.
And to be fair, at least, you know, still talking about comic books, we like I said, we don't really see that nuance until later in the 60s, especially with Marvel starting, you know, when Marvel got on the scene or started to get big on the scene and started to push the issue, because, you know, the Comics Code Authority was very strict. And it largely is what shaped comic books as a medium in the West. And that was less about World War II and more that this, you know, hack psychiatrist is like, violent comic books are poisoning the mind of our youth and making them antisocial. And, you know, basically all the violent video game arguments that you hear today, except about comic books, and it was like 50 years ago. Well, more like 70 years ago, but still.
That's the thing as well. Like you can actually look to the manga industry to like compare what happens when you don't get that type of interference in like the moral objections to a particular form of like media or art expression. For one that's probably more commonly known by people, you look at the Dragon Ball series. So you got Dragon Ball Z, which in the manga it's all just Dragon Ball. But you look at the things that they depict in that series and how it was translated into the West, and like a lot of the translation decisions are directly a result of the comic book. What did you call it? I forget what it's called.
The Comics Code.
So the comics code, like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that informed Saturday morning cartoons, where you've got like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where the police don't get guns, they get lasers, because somehow it's better to kill someone with lasers than it is bullets. And you get like Xena and Hercules using the hilt of the swords instead of the sharp pointy end, which is how you meant to use it.
I think that was I think that was a similar, similar set of restrictions, but it wasn't, technically the same. I think it was Hays Code.
I'm talking about a cultural desire to, feel that this is appropriate. So not that they brought the cultural, the comics code and said, okay, we're going to apply this here, but more that society, because we've got that framework for entertainment, then we need similar frameworks for other entertainment and things like that. So sort of how that affects us culturally, not that is the Rosetta Stone for no, I don't want to call it censorship because it's not censorship, but screw it, censorship.
Yeah, well, it is self-censorship. It's an industry censoring themselves. At least in the case of the comics code, because they feared that the government would step in and censor them if they didn't censor themselves.
So like you look at the original Dragon Ball and you look at the amount of violence and the amount of risky content, and they've got cigarettes and stuff. And that wasn't seen as an issue, at least in Japan, and then in America. In the West, I'm not going to say America because it's not like it was only in America that it was an issue. But then in the West, it's like, well, no, we can't have people die. They need to. So Voltron, right? There's characters in Voltron. I think it was Sven in the translation, like in the dub. But like at one point, that character dies and is replaced by their cousin. But the American version just ignores that. Like then Sven just goes away for a few episodes and then he's just back and he's like, oh, I was in hospital or something. But like in Japan, it's a completely different story because they actually tell stories about death and loss, and they deal with that in children's cartoons.
And
like Go Line is the original show that Voltron was sort of cut together from. And that's a kid's show. That's not like a lot of anime, which is sort of more your young adult, mid-age teen, as opposed to like Saturday morning cartoons. But like Go Line, definitely, and they deal with that stuff, and we don't deal with that, or we didn't deal with that in the West anyway.
And once again, it's like the West is very much, at least a decade behind anime, because like we don't really get that kind of development and nuance in cartoons until the 90s, with shows like Batman the Animated Series, which makes a lot of the villains in Batman the Animated Series are very sympathetic. In the, like, for instance, Harley Quinn, who was actually invented for that TV show, is an abuse victim. And it is explicitly shown in the series, well, as explicitly as you can for show aimed at kids, that she is abused by the Joker. And or for instance, Mr. Freeze, Mr. Freeze's thing about his frozen wife and finding a cure for her.
Trying to cure.
That was actually a retooling of him for the show. Originally, he was just, he was just a gangster with a cold gimmick. I think he was actually also in the Adam West show, but he like drove around in an ice cream van.
What's he doing?
But don't quote me on that.
Yeah, no, that fits right in there with Shark Repellent and the Batcopter and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised.
And though now that I think about it, I wonder if if part of this nuance is because American producers started taking source material from Japan and very much just making carbon copies of it in a different genre. Like, for
talking about
instance,
The Matrix? Shots fired.
No, actually, I'm talking earlier.
Yeah. I just like
I'm
to have
talking.
it The Matrix.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
How it's literally a carbon copy of the Seven Samurai, just
Seven
with
Samurai.
rifles
Cowboys.
in Mexico. Yeah, rifles and guns and cowboys instead of swords and samurai.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sure it would be just as. Well, I don't know about just as much, but I'm sure it goes the other way. But it's just funny, as someone that grew up watching anime, I sort of see it going the opposite direction. From Japan and then be picked up by America more.
Yeah.
But that's just what I'm watching, I suppose. Like Ready Player One is like, oh, okay, cool. You've started watching some of the isekai genre and Sword Art Online and stuff, and decided to write a series. Oh, that's cool. Good job. Or Matrix. Like Matrix was egregious though. Like when that came out, and this is probably another interesting distinction where it brings that parallel, because in the Matrix, the was it aliens or just robots? It was just robots that took over the Earth.
Yeah.
And they are evil in relation to the humans because they are just enslaving humanity. You're just batteries, and there's no real. I don't think they ever come up with any sympathetic justification for that war, and it's very black and white.
Yeah.
Let's take out the robots, guys. Let's end the Matrix. The first movie there are several shots in there that are literally taken, like lifted right out of Ghost in the Shell. Like there's that scene where Morpheus is trying to teach Neo how to jump from building to building. And when Morpheus makes the jump and when he lands, that cinematography, that shot is like almost identical to Major Motoko jumping from a building, and the way she lands, like the stance, the way the camera is placed, the cracking on the cement around her, like it's almost identical. And then you've got all these themes and stuff of like the plugging into the Matrix using the cord at the back of the neck. And the funny thing is, like Ghost in the Shell tells this. Okay, they're not the same story, but they're the same themes. They use a lot of the same imagery, a lot of the same questions about humans interfacing with technology.
Yeah.
But Ghost in the Shell struggles with it and goes, well, can I still be human despite the fact that like the main character is mostly cybernetic? And like the whole premise of the movie and where it gets its name from, Ghost in the Shell, is like, is there still a ghost inside her shell? Is she still human even though everything is augmented and she doesn't really remember a time when she was human? Whereas the Matrix is just like, yes, we're human, get us out of this goddamn machine.
And actually it and especially in the West, and in response, the theme of technology being evil in the West, it's the AI always goes nuts and always goes
Skynet.
out to kill us. Well, even before Skynet, open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave.
Isn't that interesting though? Like, I find that often Japan has been optimistic about technology.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they, had quite a tragic event as a result of technology.
Yes.
I mean, sure, it was war technology, but even even Akira. Akira is a movie that is very post-apocalyptic, and like it's not a post-apocalyptic movie because that sort of sounds more like Mad Max, but it literally takes place in Tokyo after it is hit by not a nuclear explosion, but it's something that's not dissimilar to that. And yet the people, like the show still shows technology in a positive light, and much of it. And like you look at one of the main icons of this movie is the motorcycle that Canada rides, and that's like this really sleek, futuristic, modern motorcycle, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
and like it's not like have you ever read anything by William Gibson?
Oh yes, I read Neuromancer,
Yeah, no, that's
and
I really like his
actually,
stuff.
in my opinion, Neuromancer is probably the best depiction of AI I've ever read.
And like the Gibson stories, like Neuromancer and what's his other one? Do android sheep have electric dreams or something like that? It's a collection of
No,
short stories.
that's what you're thinking of. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Is by Philip K. Dick.
Right, I'm getting the name wrong. It's definitely William Gibson. He has got like a collection of short stories and stuff. But like across his work, his depiction of the future is gritty, grimy. Um, I don't want to say pessimistic because people are still, living their lives and stuff.
Yeah,
Um, but it's very much that technology has um, interfered almost with humans to the point where it's changed the way they live their lives and
yeah,
stuff. And funnily enough, a lot of anime doesn't do that. A lot of manga doesn't do that. It sort of looks at technology. Even just to go back to Dragon Ball, like it's almost silly, but it's worth pointing out. Like technology in Dragon Ball, it's not a big part of the series, but like they've got the capsule corp where they've got these little capsules that they just click a button and they can throw it down, and it'll turn into a vehicle or turn into a house or turn into a meal. Like it's just like this ridiculously optimistic, hey, this is where technology will
yeah.
get us one day.
Which is kind of bizarre because in Western sci-fi, especially when you get into like the space operas and such, there there's a rather annoying trope um, where they really like to harp on the where they really like to play up the noble savage trope, where you've got these people who don't have who lost their access to technology, but because of that they're stronger and better than the civilized
Yep.
um spacefaring people.
Yeah.
and
The
and basically there's this trope that humans lose something of themselves by relying on technology. Like technology makes
Yep.
like relying on technology makes humans less
Less
uh
human.
less independent, less human, less capable.
Well, that's an interesting point because so if you go to one of the more iconic anime about spacefaring human civilization or whatever, one of the big themes in that is the idea of like human emotion being quite powerful, and particularly in the first, like the original airing, the original run of that show, the the aliens that attack. They're not called myclones. Myclones are what humans are called. Zentradi, I think it is. The Zentradi, they don't understand human emotion. And so
Yeah,
part of the storyline involves that, you know, when there's Zentradi, they might clone themselves down to human size because they're like 10 meters tall,
yeah,
just as they're born, sort of thing. And, two of the characters, like, it was the Zentradi and the humans. There's characters that fall in love, and like they actually use music um, to reach out to the hearts of the Zentradi, and like that's brings them
yeah,
to a form of peace. And it's like, well, despite the fact that the humans in Macross are really technologically advanced, like they're spacefaring level, they got those really cool Valkyries that transform, and
yeah,
they got the battleship Macross, which was reclaimed alien technology. Yet they still have this really strong connection to what it is to be human and stuff. And like the
yeah,
technology doesn't take away from that for this series. It just is an
yeah,
aspect they carry along with their humanity. So much more optimistic than
yeah,
hey, we're losing our humanity.
yeah. And well, I think perhaps a lot of the reason why at least post 1950 um uh Western media is so pessimistic is because of the Cold War. And
Yeah.
everyone freaking out about what will about when the big one drops.
Yep. I have
um
to say, I felt that even in the 90s as a kid. Like I know the Cold
yeah,
War was over, um,
yeah,
well, mostly over, But like I remember, and I'm in Australia. No one's going to bomb Australia in the 90s. Like that was between other people and other places, but the media was pervasive. And like how many Simpsons episodes make a reference to when the bombs drop, sort of thing. And like that's just an example of one piece of media where you start to you can see
or
sort of
there's this really really depressing story by Ray Bradbury, There Will Come Summer Rains, that it's this automated house that it's going about this day, but it's empty, and it meant there's like what like it pans out to the front, and there are fallout shadows on the walls of the house. And eventually the house ends up burning down because it used all of its water, in pointless cleaning, and it emptied its reservoirs, and there was no one around to refill them. Wow. And, but also talking about post-apocalyptic. Oh yeah, it was probably There Will Come Soft Rains, but I would love to see like Pixar do a short of it, because Pixar is good at like just destroying your emotions, but that's kind of getting off topic. But talking about post-apocalyptica, what happens after the world ends. In a Will Time. And there's a cancer-ridden dog at the beginning of the story, and it like crawls into the house and it dies, and it's basically the story is, the point of the story is mutually assured destruction sucks.
Yep.
But so if anyone hasn't read Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, I suggest it if you have the time and patience for it. But it takes place thousands and thousands of years after into our future, because the point of the Wheel of Time is ages come and ages go, and eventually the events of an age will essentially repeat themselves. Time is a wheel, and in the Wheel of Time setting, there is it's in one of the books. It's a little Easter egg. It's like a sentence or two long about how there's a legend where two giants named Mosk and Merc fought each other with spears of fire. And I don't know. It seems to me that it's like very much like a story about the Cold War going hot that had been garbled by millennia of oral tradition.
I don't know. No, I won't spoil it. I was going to say there's this other, but I won't go into the end of Evangelion and stuff. Like, that's kind of like, it alludes to like the rebirth after like some apocalyptic event like that as well.
Yeah.
Although I'm not super down on the lore with End of Evangelion. I've kind of been waiting for the rebuild movies to come out to sort of watch the reboot through and not taint it. Well, not taint, but so I haven't gone back and rewatched it recently. That was something that was just massive in high school. When I was in high school.
Yeah.
Evangelion was meant to be better than Macross, was how it was out. It's hard to remember a time when Evangelion wasn't like the anime that everyone sort of is aware of, if not seen, and in Japan it's still everywhere. So
yeah. And well, even even our comedies about the end of the world are from the 1970s and such are very, very dark. I'm referring to Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which is actually an adaptation of a thriller called Red Alert. And but yeah, basically what Stanley Kubrick did is he made it into a dark satire about the world going to and past the edge of nuclear annihilation because one general goes nuts and decides to bomb Russia first.
Wasn't there an actual event where there was like a malfunction at a military base and they thought missiles had been launched and they had to make a decision whether or not to launch
oh yeah
they didn't, but they could have. They were this close.
Yeah, I think there were like 2 or 3 different times where we were like seconds from a hot nuclear war.
Crazy.
And that's such a sunny place to take the discussion. So perhaps we should turn to the one instance of positivity or optimism in regards to the future and technology and piece that I can think of, at least in popular, at least that made it big and became a cultural icon in the West. And that, of course, is Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. and even then, the original series was very much Kirk flying around, banging the hot aliens and punching the ugly aliens.
And the poor red shirts.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the red shirt trope is at least as old as the Odyssey.
Oh, so it wasn't in the original series, eh? Am I showing my ignorance on the series?
No, I'm talking about Homer's Odyssey.
Oh, right. Yep, sorry. I was thinking like Star Trek Odyssey, like a series I hadn't seen.
No. As far as I'm aware, there is no Star Trek Odyssey.
It sounds like one though, right?
Yeah. But so yeah, the trope of having expendable crewmen to die just to show how dangerous the monsters and perils are is basically a trope almost as old as Western literature itself.
Yeah. Well, Rain brings up Studio Ghibli movies with nuke robots and stuff. And I think it's a good thing that I was watching it last night. I think that's an allusion to Nausicaa of the Wind. Because in that particular series, so that's a post-apocalyptic series where the nations that at least the movie deals with are living on the edge of a toxic jungle where these insects, if you interfere with the jungle, they will just rampage and destroy the city or the village or whatever.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. I'm
going to then talk in general terms and not give spoilers, and I guess someone watching may not have seen it either. But like as a movie, like in the intro, you do see like these hulking monsters that are just causing all this destruction and damage, and it's referring to the way the world ended. And technology ended the world, but then in Nausicaa, the movie, nature is back in control, and the entire movie sort of deals with that tension between what is the value of technology versus what is the value of looking after the planet. It sort of has a very so a lot of the time in Western media, so I'm thinking of like the Fallout series and stuff. The planet is just desolate, and there's not really. There might be hints here of like in over a long period of time that the planet might get restored in some versions of post-apocalyptic media. Certainly don't remember it in stuff like Mad Max or anything.
Oh like that. There was that Green Valley in Mad Max 3 Thunderdome.
Yeah, but it's not like it's going to restore the whole world sort of thing. Whereas like Nausicaa is less pessimistic about it. Like the main village is in like this Green Valley, Valley of the Wind and yada yada yada. But like the idea that the planet actually cares for itself and the planet is active in terms of helping humans make the right choice.
And
which is in Final Fantasy as well.
And Rain brings up a good example for the West, Wall-E, but you could very much argue that was possibly that could have very much been influenced because it is a more recent film.
It was really pessimistic about the way humans interact with technology as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the autopilot that turns evil is essentially HAL 2.0. Though I would I like the one example in regards to nature, nature being good, would that I can think of doesn't actually come from America in regards to the West. It comes from England. And that is, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Let's see. Except if you pay attention, it's implied, by and large, caused the garbage, and actually it's not possible to run out of space for dumps, which makes it more companies versus nature rather than tech versus nature. But back to the point I was starting on is there is and I will say once again, it wasn't meant by Tolkien to be an allegory because Tolkien famously despised allegories, but there is a definite theme about industrialization versus the natural world, especially in the subplot with Isengard and Fangorn Forest. And you could very much argue that was more Tolkien's response to World War One, because he was writing it during World War II, but it was published in the 50s, so.
Yeah, I one of the other things that I found interesting as well in the difference is often, and you'll possibly be able to say no, this is the case in the West as well, but a lot of sort of Eastern stories, they seem to have, they kind of bring themselves back down to much smaller stakes. So like the main characters, so we've spoken a bit about how like whoever is the foil or the antagonist, there may be differences in, to what extent they're, clearly black evil versus shades of gray versus whatever else. Often one of the main characters in anime are very normal. I was going to say boring, but that's more something recent, and this whole other issue of like, not, what's it called? Not Mary Sue. What's the male version?
Gary Stu.
Yeah, that Gary Stu thing's a little bit different, but like a lot of main characters are just very simple and very straightforward. So again, to go to an example of, something that might be a bit more familiar to people, you look at, Sailor Moon and Usagi, like, who's just this really klutzy, airheaded high school girl, and she sort of gets wrapped up in this other world as she sort of gets, pulled into the world of being Sailor Moon and part of the Sailor Scouts and stuff. And like, it starts off as something where it's like, I'm just interested in protecting my friends and, protecting my school and stuff like that. And it's not until sort of much later that it expands into this much bigger plot. But it's funny that it's not like, you look at that and then you look at, say, Peter Parker, and Peter Parker, sure, at the start he's selfish and he, seeks for personal gain, but very quickly he gets pulled into the, no, I need to do this because it's the right thing to do. And, with great power comes great responsibility. And I feel like I see that less. So even Superman, he feels a moral obligation to, be Superman, and, it seems like it's
in regards to Peter Parker, it's more a reaction to trauma and very much a martyr complex, because he's selfish. He selfishly used his powers to try and make money, and he didn't stop the robber who went and then shot Uncle Ben.
Spoil it. No, just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen Uncle Ben die as many times as we've seen Thomas and Martha Wayne die. So
poor bastards.
But hello, Chris from the Daily Atheist. But
hey,
yeah, and but it's very much a guilt complex, and yeah, so and Superman is very much implied that it's a source of his at-home Americana upbringing.
Yeah.
Because it is a modern graphic novel, but Superman Red Sun is an Elseworld story about like what if his spaceship had landed in Soviet Russia. And instead of Superman becoming, basically becoming a normal not a normal, taking the guise of a normal person only showing up as Superman when he's needed, he essentially becomes the dictator of Russia and eventually the world to do good through force, essentially.
Which is interesting, whether or not that would be right or wrong.
Yeah, and
it's doing good, but
and it also does a lot of interesting things with the Lex Luthor Superman dichotomy, because in that version, Lex Luthor is essentially like the Howard Hughes. He's a government scientist, and Superman is the only being on Earth who had been able to challenge him mentally. So it's the Soviet Red Scare, and it's basically the Cold War as Lex Luthor versus Superman.
I do want to read that. I've known about that one for a little while, so
yeah,
I need to get into more trade paperbacks.
Yeah,
get all the ads.
Yeah, and so I think that's a good place to end it, at least for today. Because GE is the Nevermore Tavern is interviewing Godless Engineer, and we don't want to take too many viewers away from that. So go ahead and do the final round of shilling, and you guys can jump over to the Nevermore Tavern live stream.
I'm just going to really quickly. Wait, I think everyone in the chat's already subscribed to me anyway, so this is probably largely pointless. But go and subscribe to me.
Yeah, I know there are at least a couple that aren't.
That link didn't work. I suck at this. That's all right. Look, I'll figure it out at some point. That's fine. But yeah, go and check out Jay's channel. That'll be awesome. What I might do instead of linking my channel is I'll link my most recent video, because I still reckon it's an awesome video.
That's still the BoJack Horseman one, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I look at the way BoJack Horseman helps, or not helps. I look at the way BoJack Horseman deals with death and dying and the fear of death. Mild spoilers for the final season. I do base that episode on the second last episode of the entire series, but it doesn't spoil the story. It just spoils where some characters are at in terms of arc, so.
And Superman as a nuke allegory is very much a modern invention. And yes, Vagrant Sam's the links to Vagrant Sam's channel and Twitter are in the description below.
Thanks for those as well, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you to Dave, the shill extraordinaire.
Doing awesome.
Yeah. So, Sam, do you have a tagline?
No, I don't. I still don't
Okay.
do like content that is all unified under one thematic thing. So
Yeah. Well, okay. In that case, I'll just finish this off with remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug.
See you guys.
Yep. Bye.